Hey everybody. In sort of the what we've been working up to category, this week what we're going to look at is how to use Python for actual website scraping. So as we sort of mentioned in class, we've been sort of working backwards in a way through the process of doing data journalism and data analysis, because we started out by looking at a really clean, really complete data set and learning how we can draw inferences from data once we have it in that form. And over the course of the last few weeks, we've been dealing with different ways that we can do analysis, but also sort of transformations on those data sets when we're trying to find information, find trends, patterns, and categories that aren't easily done with existing tools. But we continue to work with this sort of nice tabular data that we're able to download. As we've mentioned, a lot of times this isn't the case. It's sometimes you do get information that you're looking for in an Excel spreadsheet that you can easily convert. But a lot of times there's information that's stored on the web or displayed on the web that isn't actually very accessible. As a nice file type that we might want to be able to do analysis on. And so for that purpose, we use programming to quote unquote scrape the data from the web and actually separate it from the markup in which it's embedded, so that we can get at the valuable data that's sort of mixed in with all this other formatting information for the HTML page. So as an example of this, we went and looked at the USDA National Nutrient Database for standard reference. This is another USDA resource, obviously not the market news, but a related resource that provides information about the nutritional value of various foods and commodities. And I think you can probably tell where I'm going with this. I, of course, am going to use this to evaluate the nutritional value of my apples. So I've been doing a lot of studying of apples these days, and now I'm sort of curious to know what's in them. So there's a lot of categories available here. I'm going to bet that I can find it under fruits and fruit juices, and indeed right away I see this apples raw with skin. Now this is a perfect example of a kind of page that I might find, right? It's easy enough to read, but I don't see anything that lets me download this information in any kind of nice Excel format or even an XML or a text file, right? So I don't have a lot of options with this except to somehow copy it. And obviously I could try to do this by hand, but there's a strong chance that just sort of copying and pasting this, it's going to get all crammed up together and not be very effective. Obviously, even if we could do that for these purposes, we're going to look at doing it with a script because many of the time that copying and pasting wouldn't work either. So the first thing to do, the first thing that's going to help us understand how effectively we can scrape this data is, first of all, its original layout, right? So what's nice about this and why this seems like a good target for scraping is because the data is actually in something like a tabular form, right? In fact, we can probably bet that, this is a data table, right? It just happens to be a data table that's rendered in HTML. And so what we want to do is we want to kind of get a look at the code that is being used to format that table and see if it gives us a good way to kind of go through that with our script and pull out the information that we want. And so I'm in Firefox right now, but actually the browser that I prefer for doing this kind of work is Chrome. And the reason for that is that a lot of the sort of tools that we're going to use to inspect our web page to sort of see how it's actually organized in code are built into Google Chrome, and I can really easily actually just sort of come here and do a right click and say inspect element, and what this is going to do is pop up a window on the bottom that actually shows me the code that is organizing my data table as I see it here. And so I can see right away, it's nice, it does this sort of highlighting thing. So what I can see is there is, on this page, there is in fact a table, an actual HTML table, and that it has a header component here that is that constitutes all of this information, and that it also has a T-body tag, right, which is the bulk of the information that I'm actually interested in. And then beyond that, it's organized in a way that kind of makes sense. It has TR is the HTML code for table row, TD is I guess it's table cell, but now I'm trying to think of what the D stands for. But I can see as I roll over that I can get, I can sort of get a nice target on these individual rows, and in fact that within each one I see, okay, there's a TD that has water, that's separated from the next one, which has grams, all of these things which have the individual values. So this lets me know that this is actually probably a very good target for doing some scraping code on. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, this is where I'm going to go to Python. Python is going to do two things for us in this context. The first that we're going to look at right now is just going to go through the process of actually opening up this file through a script. It's going to open up this file, it's going to pull down the code, and it's going to write it to a file on our hard drive. This is very, very similar to what we've been doing with our existing tabular data with our CSV files, except that it's opening up a web location instead of another location on our hard drive. So to do that, I'm going to go to Aptana here. I'm going to do everything kind of in the same mix. You guys are obviously welcome to create additional projects and folders, but just to keep it simple in this case, I'm going to start here. And so, of course, I start by opening up a new file. I'm going to call this apple vitamin scraper.py. Okay, and again, I'm calling it a scraper because that's what I think of this as, is I'm scraping data off the web. Really, I'm downloading it. I could call it a downloader. And the first thing I'm going to do, as we know, is we know what this keyword means, import. I'm going to import a library called urllib2. It is, as one could infer, the second version of an earlier library called urllib. And I'm going to import the URL library for downloading information, downloading web pages. Okay, so I've done that, and what's nice is that the syntax of the urllib is actually extremely straightforward, right? It's going to mimic pretty closely the same syntax that we use for opening a file. So I'm going to say, okay, my web page, right, is, and now this is the urllib2.url open. Okay, so we see how we have that open syntax that we're used to seeing. And actually, all I'm going to do here is just say urllib open, and I'm going to pass it the URL of my web page. So I've done this, right? All I have to do is say this, by the way, this is the URL that I want you to open. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, you have the URL open. Now, obviously, you know, Python is not a web browser, right? We don't want it to show us the graphic version of it. What we want it to do is to pull the code down. And so to do that, I'm going to create something called I'm going to just create, again, this is a variable. I could call this anything I wanted. I'm going to call it file data. And I just say web page, right, which is that web page that I've opened. And I just say read. And now I'm not saying read lines. Whoops. Right, I'm just going to say read, and this happens to be one of those functions that doesn't need any help in terms of understanding what to do. So I'm going to say web file read, and now I'm going to open a new file. Right, I'm going to open a file on my hard drive, which is going to be the file, which is going to be the place that I copy this to. Right, so we're actually not really doing any processing other than saying open this web page, read the code, and now I want you to write the code to a new file that's on my hard drive instead of on the internet, right? So I'm just going to call this local file, and again, I use my open command, and I'm going to call this apple info, and this is going to be an HTML page, right? Remember that even though I have this big URL, right, that corresponds to this, right? We understand that this is an HTML page, so I want to write it as an HTML format. So I'm going to put an HTML extension on it. And of course, I also need to put in my specification here, right? I need to tell the computer that I'm writing to this file. This is my blank file that I'm opening. And then all I do is just say, listen, remember that file data? Remember that code that I read from the web page? I want you to write exactly that code to that new file I just created. So I'm going to say local file write file data, and then local file close, right? Because we've opened this up, we want to close it. And we also need to close the web page because we've opened that too, right? A little bit different. We didn't have to explicitly close. I mean, actually, we probably could have gotten away without explicitly closing the web page, but it's not a good idea. Anything you open, it's a good idea to close. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to use just the same way I always do. I'm going to use my Python run here. And of course, I don't have any output because what do we know? I I didn't put any print statements in there. So hopefully, I'm just going to throw a print, hi there, right? Just like to make sure things are going, and print, done. Let's try that. So I'm going to go up here, run my debug. Okay, so seems like things should probably be okay. Oh, and in fact, if I had looked more closely, I would have seen appleinfo.html appeared in my browser here. So I can go ahead and open this up just to sort of take a look at it and make sure that what I think should be in there is in there. And how am I going to know if I've got what I want? Well, I can sort of compare it to the things that I found when I was inspecting this in Chrome, right? When I was using this inspector. So one of the things I see is this div class called nutlist. I assume that means newt list, like nutrient list. You kind of find all sorts of funny things when you start looking at this code, right? But I want to know if this table is here and if it has the information. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a really simple apple F, and I'm going to look for table. And yeah, it looks like, yep, there we go. So I start to see the data, the information that I sort of expect here. And it's kind of hard to read in this format, to be perfectly honest, right? Like, we can see there's all kinds of markup about styles and how big the font is and how wide the thing is and where it's positioned, right? So this is a real mess. If I were trying to copy this out by hand, it would be extremely difficult and extremely time consuming. Fortunately, there is a wonderful library that we have available called Beautiful Soup. And that is a widely used Python library for parsing HTML pages, and it provides some really handy functions for getting right at the data that we want to. So in the next video, we're going to come back, we're going to look at Beautiful Soup and how we can use it to start targeting the actual data that we are looking for.